Dark Souls 3 is known for many things. It's the finale to an incredible video game series. It has some of the best action combat I have ever played in a video game, and maybe most importantly, it is known for its incredible encounters and bosses. Some of them still holding up even with the semi-recent release of Elden Ring. And with that, welcome to the boss ranking of Dark Souls 3 bosses in 2024. Today I will have a look at the bosses of Dark Souls 3, whether they aged well or rather poorly, and rank all of them and talk about what they did well and what they didn't. If you're interested in this kind of content, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and also like the video and even share it. It helps out the channel immensely, and there is a lot more content like this coming in the future. Dark Souls 3 was my first exposure to this incredible video game series, and it's still one of my favorite games of all time. I absolutely love nearly everything in this game, and the bosses are overall just incredible and high quality. Ranking all of these was very hard because I literally couldn't decide where to place some certain bosses, but I think I'm pretty content with the list I got so far. Also, I introduced a new ranking system, something that is relatable for everyone. I will be ranking the bosses from F to S tier, or basically awful to amazing tier, basically going from worst to the absolutely best. If you're interested how I roughly distribute the points, I'm going to show you my tab where everything can be seen, but I'm going to explain in the segments what I like about the bosses and what I dislike. And with all this out of the way, let's get into the boss ranking. As far as PvP goes, I do not really care for it, so I guess this is alright. It exists, but I'm not really interested. As far as the NPC goes, this is genuinely one of the worst bosses in the series, in my opinion. I genuinely don't really like anything about this boss. The speech you have to listen to from Judicator Argo every time you die and have to redo the fight is just annoying. I know it's a loading screen, but it's probably even worse than the old monk run-up in Demon Souls. And the fight is actually even worse. The Painting Guardians are some of the most annoying NPC cunts I have ever seen in my life. I hate them. They are so spammy. They heal the boss. It's absolutely annoying. And there are two of them in this fight. Oh my god. And don't let me even get started on this fucking NPC. He can spam you. He can parry you. He can create this annoying wall and you have to run away and attack him. It's just annoying. I hate this boss so much. It's probably bottom 10 in the series for me, and the only reason it's not bottom 5 anymore is because he's pretty susceptible to thrusts when he charges his weapon art, but that's not really a positive, and most of the time I just end up cheesing him with the poison mist cheese, which I'm very fine with using. Do I have anything good to say about this boss? I mean, his soundtrack is pretty great, but like, that's most of DS3 for you, and I appreciate that you at least get to fight one of the best enemies in the Souls series before you have to fight this dogshit boss. So, hey, that's something. It doesn't have anything to do with Haflight, but at least I don't have to do Haflight, so that's a positive. Nah, seriously, I just hate this boss. It's terrible and it's the worst in Dark Souls 3, easily, no contest. If this was an enemy encounter in Archdragon Peak, just a regular part of the level, I would probably say it's pretty memorable, cool and special, and I sorta like it. However, if I judge this as a boss, I don't really enjoy it. It's not really a boss fight, you just run through a little portion of the Archdragon Peak level and one-shot this big wyvern with a headshot. The only annoying thing that can happen is you being killed on the way by this chained guy who's the real boss of this level, but like, it doesn't really happen at all anymore, and it's a fight that exists, but I don't particularly enjoy doing it, and should I die, it's really annoying. Don't really have much more to say. It would be a solid level hazard, but as a boss, it's just pretty bad overall. I don't like it. Also, have to say, this is one of the most boring soundtracks in Dark Souls 3, and I don't really enjoy it at all. And the Wyvern's design is pretty cool, but that's it. High Lord Volnir is a skeleton guy who watches over the catacombs of Karthus, and has a pretty cool design, I guess. But that's really it. It's a gimmick fight where you need to destroy his 3 rings that protect him from the abyss, and if you do so, he will be dragged down there, which is a pretty cool defeat animation, to be honest. However, besides that, the fight only consists of very slow and delayed punches with basically zero tracking, so it's sometimes even hard to get hit by them. That's what you see on most runs. If Volnir somehow manages to live longer than 20 seconds, you actually get to see some different attacks, like him pulling out his magical magical sword, doing AoEs with it, and even summoning skeletons. But even with the extended fight I tried to do in the footage run, he didn't summon the skeletons, so it's pretty rare overall. He can sometimes kill you in a pretty bullshit way in my opinion, if you stand close to the third ring on his right arm and just get deleted by the mist, but it doesn't really happen too often, and I don't know, this boss is easy, pretty forgettable, and I don't really have much to say about him, same as the entry before. I do like his soundtrack, however, you never hear this good part. Because it only comes up later in the soundtrack, which is a big shame. But yeah, Volnir is a boss that exists. I'm going to keep it short for Crystal Sage, because I'm pretty neutral on this boss. He's not badly designed in any way, shape or form. He's a very solid magic fight with a solid arena that provides cover. However, I never find him really fun. He can deal a lot of damage in New Game Plus and on low HP runs, which can make him really frustrating. However, overall, it's a pretty solid fight. You can dodge most of the projectiles and it's fine. In phase 2 there is downtime where you wait for the clones to appear, which can drag on a bit because he disappears every time he gets hit basically, but he doesn't have that much HP, so it balances it out. The clones can be very dangerous, but you can dispose of them with just one hit, which once again balances it out very well. There is just one thing I want to quickly mention before I move on. I love parrying this boss. It's one of the most satisfying parries in the entire game, and oh my god, it's just so good. But yeah, that's it. The worst thing about this fight is that it's disappointing. It could have been so much more and an incredibly memorable fight in the DLC, but it's just decent. The Great Wolf is fun to fight overall, and I really enjoy his moveset, especially did on my footage run, but the NPC is just really boring and dull, and I don't enjoy fighting him, and he can be even annoying with some weapons, so he's really just a nuisance. And the saddest thing is, this could have been like a fight where you basically fight Artorias and Sif together. Obviously not actually Artorias and Sif, but something similar, but it's just an NPC and an enemy who was already used before with some new attacks, so I think the Wolf's moveset should have been expanded upon way more. Besides that, the arena is stunning, the soundtrack is awesome, phase 2 goes really hard, the presentation is top notch, but the fight just can't live up to it. And yeah, it could have been just way better, but honestly, most of the time I end up enjoying at least fighting the Wolf, so I don't hate it existing. The Deacons of the Deep are very likely my favorite multi-fodder enemy encounters. The Royal Red Vanguard is pretty boring and just has nothing to it, and the Celestial Emissaries have pretty cool atmosphere, but that's really about it. Deacons actually have some cool mechanics and are just really fun to beat up, to be honest. I love destroying them with huge weapons. Most of the fun with Deacons is just obliterating them. However, after you defeat 5 marked Deacons, you get to phase 2. There are healers, the fat deacons with the blue robes, and then there are the priests which summon those curse orbs which will curse you if you don't interrupt it, which is just really cool and puts a timer on the fight. And I actually died this way on my first run, which definitely shocked me back then. Besides that, the OST is genuinely one of the most underrated in Dark Souls 3. It's very awesome. I love it, especially in phase 2, but phase 1 is also amazing. It's an awesome build up, and the deacons just look really awesome. I love their lore, that they're connected to Aldrich, and I love this area, Cathedral of the Deep. It's one of my favorite in the entire game, one of the most underrated From Software areas. Just all in all, I think this fight is just decent. I don't think it's bad. I actually kind of like it. I put it as a high decent tier. I genuinely like this fight more than most. Alright, everyone calm down. Put down your pitchforks. Yes, your eyes do not fool you.
Do you question your eyes? This is no dream, I assure you.
I actually decided to put the Great Wood in the very low B tier. And you might say, this boss has no business being up this high. And you're right. but I'm just very biased towards this boss, because Greatwood and me have history. Back when I didn't even know what the series really is, only heard Dark Souls is supposed to be a very hard game, I watched a friend play this game in a Discord stream and was really interested once he entered the Undead Settlement and fought the Greatwood. The aesthetic of the entire area and the design of the Greatwood made me really curious. And now, I mean, it's very safe to say this is by far my favorite video game series of all time, and it's not even close. I'm eternally thankful to this boss to basically introduce me to some of the best media I ever consumed. However, if I talk about the fight, I actually don't think it's bad. If it wasn't for the bias, I would probably still put it in the decent tier, because to be honest, the fight isn't as bad as most people say. The only thing I dislike is the area denial acid spam, which can get annoying, but I like popping the balls. Dodging the attacks feels really good, and overall it's a really fun fight. The design is amazing, the area preceding it is amazing, underrated as well. Maybe unsurprisingly, I will once again praise this game's soundtrack. However, this time it's not the typical Yuka Kitamura boss soundtrack you mostly hear in Dark Souls 3. It's a very distinct and unique track, and I just really like it. I think it's awesome, it fits the fight perfectly, and honestly, I like it so much that I even listen to it outside of the game, which most people wouldn't do with this track. All of this makes me appreciate the Greatwood way more than most people do, and it just has a special place in my heart. I could never disrespect the Greatwood. Greatwood, maybe you're not a B tier boss, but in my heart you always will be. Udex Gundyr is just a really good tutorial boss overall. I will not really be going into detail about his moveset because there is a version later in the game that expands on it massively, and he's a much better boss in my opinion. However, I like that he teaches you the fundamentals and the mechanics. He has an awesome design, great memorable soundtrack, and it's just a really good way to kick off the game. The phase 2 is really weird and you can't really see what's going on, but it basically teaches you that you can stick to big targets and big monsters and don't really have to worry about it, which is way more effective than trying to outspace it, because he's way more dangerous that way, and being next to him severely limits his moveset. And this is actually very useful for the next boss fight, which is really awesome if it was done intentionally. Besides that, I don't really have much more to say. It's a good boss. Ward of the Boreal Valley was my first ever wall in a Souls game. When I first picked up Dark Souls 3 in 2020, he absolutely annihilated me. After beating Gundyr in like 3-4 attempts, I was pretty confident and it was going pretty well, but then Ward absolutely destroyed me, and it's not even funny. However, this boss taught me a lot of important things going forward in the series, and because of that I will never forget this boss. I think he might be an even better tutorial than Gundyr personally, and I just love his visual design. In general, the Outrider Knight bosses and enemies are super awesome. Of course, I need to mention the soundtrack again. This soundtrack has garnered a lot of popularity. It's used in a lot of memes. You probably even heard it, even if you're not really aware that it's from Dark Souls. It's absolutely incredible for the second boss in the game, and phase 2 just goes insanely hard. It's awesome. The moveset is also honestly pretty good. You can avoid most of it by hiding under him in phase 1. However, in phase 2, he gets way more aggressive and gets bigger hitboxes, so it doesn't work out as well anymore. Also, he did this really weird attack I've never seen before where he drags his mace. I think that happens if you stand at a certain distance in phase 2, but I never saw it before because I usually just try to hide under him or behind him, so that's cool. You're never done learning in a Souls game. Overall, I do enjoy this boss quite a bit. I think it's a big enemy done pretty well, and I mostly have fun dodging his slow swings. I also mostly enjoy dodging his pyromancy attacks. Besides that spit is just really annoying and tedious. It's a really fun boss. However, the best part about this boss for me is the lore and the story. He is the old demon king holding on to his kingdom, slowly petrifying and crumbling, and way past his prime. It's truly sad, and it's reflected in the fight very well. He looks very tired, he fights slowly. He doesn't possess the strength to even properly wield his big club anymore. And at the end of the fight, when he gets to a certain HP threshold, he just collapses, falls down, and barely can defend himself anymore. The last ditch effort he tries is this big explosion, but if that misses, he's basically dead. It's really sad. The demons were always persecuted and hated. Truly a tragic story coming to its end, this kingdom finally dying. And while this is not the end for demons that happens in the Ranked City DLC, it's still just a really sad ending to the Izalith lore. I do think this boss could have been much more. He's definitely a bit lacking in some regards. However, that doesn't mean he's a bad boss. Quite the opposite. Yorm is an insanely awesome cinematic boss. He's intended to be defeated with the Storm Ruler weapon, which makes for a pretty cinematic showdown. However, it also makes for a very easy showdown, because 5 hits is everything it takes to defeat this giant. However, this boss is also designed to be able to be defeated without the Storm Ruler, which is very interesting, and I think they should have gone in that direction and just expanded his moveset way more. If you hit the hands, he will eventually stagger and you get to hit his weak spot, the head, and even go for a riposte for massive damage. Besides that, I love dodging his stomp. It's not really useful because even if you knocks down, you can just easily dodge the swing, but it's really satisfying to get it because it requires a very specific timing. Slashes. His moveset is, as mentioned, very limited. However, it's just awesome dodging this great Yorm's machete. It's very cool. His visual design is absolutely incredible and stunning. I think that's a big reason why people are sad that this boss isn't more. He was hyped up so much in the cinematic cutscene and then he was, well, just a gimmick boss. And of course, it's hard to mention a DS3 boss without talking about the soundtrack. The soundtrack for both phases is incredible, phase 2 even more so. I think even with his shortcomings, Yorm is still a good boss. Aldrich is one of the best magic bosses I've ever fought and is only second to Renala from Elden Ring. I really enjoy the many mechanics he has. For example, the lingering purple orbs, which either appear after he vanishes in phase 2 or he summons them just as a regular attack. You can strafe them pretty easily, but they can get you easily as well, so it's really positioning and movement dependent, which I really enjoy. Besides that, he has the arrow spam, which is just a straight line in phase 1, but becomes the most dangerous attack in phase 2 when it becomes a homing rain of arrows. He also pairs it with his magic projectiles in phase 2, which require a very special kind of movement, which I really enjoy doing. It's just really fun to successfully pull off. Life and Scythe is one of the most fun melee attacks to dodge in the game, and I just really enjoy that it's a very positioning based fight. But not only mechanically is Aldrich a really good and fun boss, he's also very impactful in the Dark Souls 3 lore. He is super important and is responsible for everything that happened in Irithyll and, well, the remains of Anor Londo. With all this said, Aldrich is just a really good boss and I think he's a bit too underrated nowadays. Just like Greatwood, Osiris might be a bit too high on my tier list, but I just can't help it. He's my guilty pleasure in Dark Souls 3. I love nearly everything about this fight, besides the pretty bullshit insta-charge attack. However, if he does it at a long range, you can avoid it just fine, and if you position yourself correctly, standing behind him, you can also work around it, so it's not like it ruins the fight for me. However, I will not defend it, it's not a really good attack. Besides that though, I enjoy nearly everything. I enjoy his magic attacks, I love his spin in phase 2, and I just love the atmosphere in this fight. I love that he talks to you in phase 1 and his voice actor is really iconic. I love his voice actor. The phase transition is really awesome when he crushes the baby, caught me off guard and is really memorable. Just a really fun boss. Talked about this boss in much more detail in my underrated boss video because I think he deserves way better than most people give him credit for. He is a really cool boss. I love Osiris. Before even talking about the boss fight, I just need to mention how insanely epic the presentation of this boss is. It's a bridge just before you enter one of the highest points in Lothric Castle, the Archives, and there is the eclipse in the background and all these pilgrim butterflies. It's an absolute stunning scenery, it's absolutely awesome. The fight is also just great. I really enjoy it every time I do it. It's a great mix of really quick attacks, shield bashes, really heavily, insanely delayed attacks, just hyper aggressive aggressiveness from the Dragon Slayer armor. I also really enjoy the phase 2 where the Pilgrim Butterflies join the fight. It makes you wary of your positioning once again, which I really appreciate. And it also adds like an external danger to the boss fight which can't be dealt with and needs to be kept in mind, which is really unique and awesome, and I wish FromSoft tried something like this again. The Dragon Slayer armor also looks absolutely amazing. The design is awesome. It drops one of the best weapons in the game and it's just always a blast. I enjoy this boss every playthrough. It's super fun. I just love it. Soundtrack, once again, top notch. Absolutely amazing. The Pharaoh's Undead Legion is easily the most memorable early game boss in Dark Souls 3, and it's not even close. While it was not the hardest boss for me on my first run, it was definitely the most memorable. The soundtrack is top 5 in Dark Souls 3 for me. It's absolutely incredible and fits for both phases just perfectly. So how do the two phases go? Phase 1 is a very unique take on the gang fight formula. Basically, you have the main boss and a weaker version of the main boss as a duo fighting you, and after a certain time, a third Abyss Watcher with red eyes will appear. However, this guy is rather neutral. He isn't your enemy, but he isn't your ally either. He will attack you and the enemy depending on your positioning and which target he locks on, which most often makes him either fight the main boss or the other Abyss Watcher, making you be able to focus on the other one he is not focused on, which is a really interesting take on the gang fight, and it fits with the boss's lore, which just makes it even better. Phase 2 is a classic Souls fight with an awesome fire sword, awesome fire after effects on hits. It's just very cinematic. It looks awesome. The fiery slashes feel amazing to dodge. Well, dodging through them is probably not the intended way because the hitboxes linger for just a little too long. However, if you space them, it's perfection. It's an amazing early game phase. I do think backstabs might be a little bit too strong, and I also think phase 2 would benefit from an HP buff. However, you can limit yourself. Don't go for backstabs and using a weaker weapon, and then that's truly where the fight is at its peak. This fight is truly great. I just really love it. Coming in next, From Software's best dragon fight to date. While Placidus X comes pretty close and Fortis X could have and should have reached Midir's heights, I still think Midir is the best dragon to rule them all so far. So let's see what FromSoft cooks up in the future. Midir does nearly everything perfectly. His design, presentation, his soundtrack is yet another top 5. I think it's my third favorite in Dark Souls 3. It's incredible. The dragon's design, him being blind, him being the Dark Eater eating the void is awesome. It's incredible. The arena is just stunning to look at. It's one of my favorite sceneries and arenas in the series. It's just perfect. So why is this boss not in the amazing tier, in the best tier? The issue, or I don't know if you want to call it issue, is the fight. The fight is just too easy on replays. The more I fight this boss, the easier he gets. And while that applies to all bosses, obviously, I think it applies to Midir the hardest. It's basically just staying in front of him, dodging all of his attacks, and punishing the head. It's not that easy, and he does have some pretty cool and interesting combinations, especially in phase 2 with the humanities. However, it's just not that challenging for me anymore, which makes it rather easy on every run. However, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy Midir. He is still a great boss, and I always look forward to fighting Midir every time I play the Ringed City DLC. It's just, I just don't have him as high as I used to. I still think he's a really great boss. This boss is the reason why I didn't elaborate too much on the tutorial boss from this game. Champion Gundyr is an awesome refight from Iudex Gundyr and expands his moveset massively. Phase 1 is mostly really similar to Iudex Gundyr with some extra moves like the kick. However, phase 2, instead of turning into a monstrosity, he gains a lot of new moves and an insane aggression level. I love how he strings attacks together, and it's just one of the most intense and fluid fights in the base game of Dark Souls 3. It's one of the best movesets in the entire game. There are just two issues here. One issue is the parry, which is not really an issue, but basically ever since I learned to parry him, I was just bullying him that way, and the fight is just way more fun without doing this. The other actual issue is his HP pool. His HP pool is just laughable. It's way too low. He needs like double the HP to be a real threat. I have to heavily nerf myself to enjoy this fight, but if you should decide to do this, you get one of the best fights in the base game of Dark Souls 3. The Nameless King is a really great boss. His presentation is really unique. You basically fight him amongst clouds, and he's of course a very important figure in the lore. He is Gwyn's banished son, which makes it even cooler to finally fight this deity. Overall, the fight still holds up really well to date. Phase 1 is not that great, but it's overall decent. It can be dispatched rather easily, and it's really satisfying to hit this big dragon. However, it's just the intro. The real fight starts when you fell this dragon and he absorbs its power. Now you have to dodge some heavily delayed swipes by the Nameless King with his great spear, and later also lightning AoEs. It's a really fun fight. I love the flow. It's slow, methodical, and it's just really good for this game's combat. This boss was notorious for being one of the hardest bosses for many people, and while I don't agree with that statement, I still think he is plenty challenging and always fun. Always look forward to fight this boss. Pontiff Sullivan was by far the hardest boss to rank from the bunch of Dark Souls 3 bosses. I was just not sure where to place him. I have the same issue like with Champion Gundyr. I've been relying on parry just way too much. However, after Elden Ring's more complex boss design, and what many people have pointed out, Pontiff is a mechanically quite complex boss, and it's just really fun experiencing it. However, I'm really bad at it so far, so I can't fully enjoy it yet. This is the boss I can see definitely making it into the amazing tier over the time, because nearly everything about this fight is perfect. The attacks are amazing and fun to dodge. His design is one of the best in the series. Soundtrack is once again amazing as most Dark Souls 3 bosses. Just a really awesome, unique boss. I can definitely see myself really enjoying this fight even more over time. I still think it's fantastic and great already. What is also really great is Phase 2. Yet another very unique and interesting approach for a gang fight. Pontiff summons a clone, and this clone basically performs the same attacks as Pontiff, which leads to insanely fun, amazing combos. However, sometimes quite rarely this can break, and it can make for a pretty shit experience. But as I mentioned, it doesn't happen too often, and when it works, which is most of the time, it's a really fun phase. Both phases are amazing. It's just a really great boss, and I can definitely see him becoming one of the best over the time. Before I talk about anything else Dancer related, I just need to appreciate this intro. It's insanely cool, one of my favorite first intros in the series. It builds up tension insanely well. It's just really cool and super memorable. I love it. Now, talking about the Dancer, I wouldn't say she's underrated. However, I would still tend to say she's a bit underappreciated. Most people prefer a lot of other bosses, which is fair. However, I still think the Dancer is definitely deserving of the highest tier, because the Dancer is a really unique boss and one of her kind in the series. Her soundtrack is really unique and distinguishable from the others, and the best thing about it is when you listen to it in-game with her footsteps. It's just super unique and something that doesn't exist in a different fight. It's like the footsteps belong to the soundtrack. It's really special. Besides that, the Dancer's moveset is just super amazing. I love her elegant yet deadly moves. Her rhythm, the way she attacks, is very different from all the other bosses, which throws me off every time I replay this game. And I still think Phase 2 of Dancer is one of the hardest fights in the entire game. I love the Dancer's design, her contrast with the dark room where you fight her in. I love dodging all of her moves. It's just a really enjoyable fight every time, and I still always look forward to fight Dancer. It's just a really good boss. The Soul of Cinder is just a perfect final boss for Dark Souls 3, both mechanically and thematically. First, mechanically, Soul of Cinder consists of two pretty difficult phases. Phase 1 are basically reincarnations from other players' movesets throughout the Souls series. There is the Straight Sword moveset, which is probably the most fun, or the second most fun. I love it, it's perfect. Then there is the Spear Wielder with Miracles, who's also really fun and has amazing uses for his spear. Then there is the Curved Sword Pyromancy user, which I didn't like for a pretty long time, and I think he's the hardest. However, I still think he's really fun, and dodging his curved sword is just really rewarding. I also really enjoy that you can punish him when he buffs himself or when he uses pyromancies, which is really good. And last but not least is the Mage, which is the easiest from them all by far, and also the one you can punish the most. However, I still love dodging his attacks, specifically the sword. This magical sword slash is just really fun. All these builds are overall pretty balanced, besides Mage being a bit too easy, and they are are all very fun for me. The soundtrack for Phase 1 is also just fantastic, an amazing build up for Phase 2. And what is Phase 2? Well, you basically fight what Gwyn should have been. Yes, that Hollow from Dark Souls 1 Gwyn who can just be parried to death is now an amazing boss with a very fun moveset, cinematic moves, and overall just still pretty good challenge in my opinion. I don't think it's as easy as some people make it out to be. However, difficulty obviously subjective. The soundtrack for this phase is also just absolute perfection. A Plin Plin Plon remix, it's perfect. How can you not love this? Thematically, the Soul of Cinder is the final boss of the Dark Souls fire linking cycle and basically the Curse of the Undead. You beat this amalgamation of everyone who has linked the fire before, and what do you get? A small little flame. The fire is fading and the cycle is coming to its end. I love how this game ended. Man, what a sick way to kick off one of the best DLCs of all time. The Demon Prince is a fantastic boss. The Demon Prince consists of two phases, obviously. However, they are very different. Phase 1 is, in my opinion, still the best FromSoft gang to date if we just talk about Souls games. You have two demons, the demon from below and the demon in pain, and there are basically 4 modes of the fight. It starts with demon from below being aggro to you and demon in pain being passive. After that, the demon in pain also aggros and they are both active, which is the most dangerous part of the fight. Then there is the mode where only demon in pain is aggressive, and then it's the mode where both of them are passive, and then it starts from scratch. It's a really interesting way to design a gang fight, and I really enjoy balancing the damage between those, and that is very important because of the phase 2. Depending on which demon you slay, you will get a different demon in phase 2. I mostly go for the demon from below, but the demon in pain is also really fun, and both of them are just amazing. And phase 2 overall is just one of the best phases in Dark Souls 3. I love like every move this boss does. One of my favorites being the amazing drag swipe he does in phase 2, the amazing delayed mega AoE, the laser special from the demon from below move, and many more. It's just the rhythm, the flow of the fight, everything is just on point. It's pure fun in phase 2, and phase 1 can definitely drag on for a bit too long, especially on the low damage run. Phase 2 makes it more than worth it. It's one of my favorite phases in the game. It's absolutely amazing. This also finally brings the demon story from Dark Souls to an end. The Demon Prince reincarnates in the last living demon, and after he is dead, the demons are finally extinct. It's a tragedy. The demons deserve better in Dark Souls.
Oh dear. Another dogged contender. Welcome, unkindled one, purloiner of cinders. You've done quite enough. Now have your rest.
While I do think this boss is quite universally beloved, I still think I love this more than most people do. I don't even know where to start with this amazing boss. This is the territory where the bosses go from really amazing to some of my favorites of all time. Well, the Twin Princes. First off, they're responsible for everything that happens in Dark Souls 3. Lothric refuses to be sacrificed as a Lord of Cinder, and therefore the Ash needs to take its place. So it's basically the reason Dark Souls 3 happens at all. But that's only one amazing thing about the fight. The other amazing thing about the fight as well, the fight. First off, with all the soundtrack praising I've already been giving, this is my favorite in the whole game. It's absolutely perfect, incredible, I just absolutely adore it. It fits the fight perfectly. Phase 1 is an amazing build up, and phase 2 is just an insanely awesome payoff. Well, and the same can be said about the fight itself. This fight mostly uses a mechanic where Lothric teleports Lorien. Lorien is a pretty normal sword wielder, however the teleportation mechanic makes him one of the most unique fights in the series. And phase 1 perfectly teaches you that. Lorien teleports around, sometimes delaying his wings massively, sometimes releasing them instantly. It's really dangerous how he can sometimes mix up his combos, and I think it's a really great start. Where this fight however ascends to absolutely god tier is phase 2. Phase 2, Lothric joins him, revives him after you kill him, and now he is the target on his back. The fight will only end once you defeat Lothric, because if you defeat Lorien, Lothric will just always resurrect him. Lothric adds a lot of new magic attacks to Lorien. He adds those orbs that can be strafed while you need to avoid the combos Lorien does. He adds some magic projectile follow-ups after Lorient's massive holy beam. They just feel even more aggressive in phase 2. It's the absolute perfect follow-up from phase 1. This fight is just incredible. I don't know what to say. It's easily my favorite in the base game, and it's not even close. And I do think it deserves the high praise because it's a very special and unique fight, and I wish FromSoft did something like this again.
Fret not, Father. We have no need of thy flail. 'Tis only the flame quivering at misguided ash. Please avert thine eyes. I would snuff out these ashes for good.
Well, Sister Freed, aka the reason to get the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. Not to dunk on the area is really fun to explore and clear. However, Frieda is definitely the best thing about this DLC and is not even close. I'm just going to start with the fight. Phase 1 is a really great introduction to her invisibility mechanic. It teaches you it perfectly because it will be needed for all the other phases in this fight. The atmosphere is also great and I love the first part of the soundtrack. After you defeat phase 1, you get to phase 2. And phase 2 is basically a reimagination of Ornstein and Smough. Father Ariandel is the very slow, big target, while Frieda is the nimble, quick one that supports him with mostly ice AoEs and also heals him. This phase can definitely take a good while if you're running a weak build. However, I think it's a really well done gank overall and it's super memorable. So after 2 decently challenging phases, what do you get? Surely you win this fight, right? Nope, you get the best phase in the entirety of Dark Souls 3. I will just say this fake out with the Titanite slab is absolutely genius and I love From Software for doing pranks like this. Now back to phase 3. Phase 3 is easily the most fun fight in the entire game in my opinion. The combos, the attacks are just so fun to avoid. I love the scythe drag. I love all of her black flame attacks. The combos she does, it's just everything flows so well. It's an amazing fight and it never gets boring. The only issue that makes her a bit easier than she would have been without it are backstabs. And while they are not as egregious as in the Abyss Watcher fight, because this fight is actually really challenging, they still can definitely make her way easier, which is not a bad thing, but it's just a bit more fun to go without them in my opinion. However, even with that, Frieda still remains one of the most challenging and fun bosses to date. It's definitely one of my favorite bosses in the series as well. She's absolutely goated.
Still here. Hand it over, that thing, your dark soul. For my lady's painting.
Finally, we climb to the top of the list. And what do we find here? A mere man. There is so much to unpack here when we talk about Gale. I will start with the themes. I think there are 3 final bosses in Dark Souls 3. The Twin Princes being the final boss for the plot of this game, because they caused all of it. The Soul of Cinder being the final boss for the plot of the entire Dark Souls trilogy, the fire linking and everything. And Gale being the final boss of the themes. The theme of human perseverance. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the world, after everything has faded and died, the only one standing is a man. Not a god, not a beast, just a man. Which is just absolutely perfect. There couldn't be a better final boss for the Dark Souls trilogy. Well, that's not everything. Gale's soundtrack, one final time, absolutely peak. I mean, what is there to even say? All 3 phases are amazing. And talking about 3 phases, we need to talk about this fight. Even starting from the build-up, you see this man here who has consumed all the pygmies to eat dried blood of the Dark Soul, and he's slowly losing it. However, in phase 1, he isn't too far gone. He's still there. He isn't consumed yet. He fights a bit like a wild beast, but it's still Gale. while in phase 2 he starts losing it. He finally unleashes the power of the Dark Soul and gets a massive power up. He still uses his crossbow, his miracles, he just fights way more elegantly. He uses the power of his Dark Soul, which infuses the cape, which forces you to dodge in certain directions to fully avoid it, which are some of the best attacks in Dark Souls 3. They are so fun to avoid. The crossbow is super dangerous if you want to avoid everything he does, and the way of White Corona boomerang miracles are just amazing. However, this is still nothing compared to the incredible phase 3. Phase 3 is still one of my favorite phases in the entire series. It's just absolutely cinematic, perfect. I love when he starts crying and breaking down and unleashes all the energy, causing lightning impact after it. I love his combos and his attacks in phase 3. He can even use a summon sign to teleport. This phase is just amazing. The dodges are tight, the stakes are very high. It's just, there couldn't be a better boss than Gale. Gale is perfection. Gale is not a good boss, he isn't a great boss, he isn't an amazing boss, he is peak. He's the best boss in Dark Souls 3 easily, and honestly I think some people downplay him way too much nowadays, which I just don't see, because this boss is still easily one of the best From Software has ever created. I don't see any flaws with Gale whatsoever. He's always fun, he's never frustrating, he's just perfection. His design is also just magnificent. I don't even know what to say anymore. It's just peak. It's impossible to dislike this boss. If you don't have Gale in S tier, you're just wrong. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. And with that said, we finish this incredibly long but fun ranking of the Dark Souls 3 bosses, and we end it on the highest of notes. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Ranking all the Dark Souls 3 bosses was a huge and gigantic task because this game has freaking 25 bosses. However, it was really fun and made me appreciate the game even more than I did before. As mentioned in the intro, if you like this kind of content, please be sure to help out this channel with liking, subscribing, commenting, all the YouTube yada yada. It helps out the channel massively and it would mean a lot to me. With all that said, thank you once again. Have a nice day, evening, or whatever is left for you, and goodbye.